Okay, hello again. Thank you very much
Yes.
everyone for coming. This is Sohaila Bana with 94803 Emergency Preparedness Alliance. And I'm glad to say with West Contra Costa Fire Safe Council now. So West Contra Costa Fire Safe Council is collaborating with the county fire department and the city fire department to make our community FireWise. That's why we're here. Thank you very much to both Richmond Fire Marshal Eric Govan and County Fire Marshal Chris Bachman. Thank you very much. So before you get started, somebody has a question, but please ask your question, and I hope you wait for the answer towards the end of the program. You can watch the recording later on. Go ahead.
Yes,
Ask
we
your
can.
question,
Thank
please.
you. Okay, 2 items. Number 1, this area has a very beautifully diverse population and a lot of people speak other languages. Getting some people involved who are multilingual, who can talk to their neighbors so that their neighbors don't feel like they're being picked on because they don't speak good English would be a wonderful thing to do. Number 2, anything that can be done to help the people who want to set up sharing, who have sheep or goats, who want to set up sharing with neighbors to remove brush and dry grass instead of using weed whackers would be a blessing to the neighborhood. And the hotter and drier it gets around here, the more of a blessing it's going to be.
Thank you very much for
3,
the
we
question.
need to know more about conserving gray water.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a bunch.
Fabulous.
And have a good evening.
Thank you. So I would like to ask our fire marshals to talk about becoming a FireWise community first, and then we can ask questions. So I don't know if Chief Bachman or Chief Govan would like to go first.
I can go first. I'll give an overview. So the ideal scenario is that either we're contacted or this group or the Fire Safe Council identifies and locates who's interested in becoming a FireWise community. And it first then starts out with kind of the educational piece. And we kind of have a template that can be either in the form of a letter, or it could even be sent out via email and you could forward it. And we just went over this with the Lafayette group and La Miranda to make sure that we were speaking the same request and same language. So I'll read the template to you. It says, "Thank you for your interest in joining a FireWise USA neighborhood and then we would list the city. Your interest shows a desire to invest in your property in your neighborhood to become more able to minimize the hazards of wildfire in your area. You will be contacted soon to discuss your neighborhood particulars and how to create a group of good neighbors in order to proceed. We will determine if your neighbors have previously indicated any interest when we talk and determine whether there is an existing FireWise neighborhood in your vicinity. Because as this grows, what we don't want is, so the minimum is 8 houses that you need to have, but it's really ideal if we continue to add on to, let's say we start with 8 and then it becomes 16 and then it becomes 50 and it keeps growing, that it just makes sense if we can add on to an existing FireWise community. Once we start creating them, it makes more sense rather than having 20 FireWise communities in the West. If they're touching and continuous, then let's continue and expand those neighborhoods and create those communities to become FireWise communities to become larger, rather than having a bunch of small 8 FireWise communities scattered throughout all of West County. That would be my recommendation. And I think a Fire Safe Council is really ideal to track those locations, the interested citizens in becoming FireWise and helping with the assessments. If they're just joining an existing one once it's established, then those benefits start immediately, and that community, that FireWise community, continues to grow very rapidly. So that would be my recommendation on that. And we would use this Fire Safe Council to help funnel all those requests and track where those neighborhoods are. And then we do the assessments. So it says, so when we talk, we will determine whether there's an existing FireWise neighborhood in your vicinity, which you may either join or we'll create a new neighborhood. If you're a new neighborhood, then we'll need to make sure we're defining the boundaries. Once we've done the basic framework, we'll begin with the steps of FireWise certification. In order to become a FireWise neighborhood, you must have a minimum of 8 homes to join the alliance. The steps of becoming FireWise include, we have to fill out a NFPA FireWise USA. You have to form a board or a committee. And then you have to obtain a wildfire risk assessment for your neighborhood or your community. And that risk assessment, I will, do you have it where I could you enable where I could share screen and I could show what the risk assessment looks like?
Of course, 1 second, please. You should be able to now.
Okay. I say that, where did it go? Okay. Let's try this again. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen. Guess I'm gonna need to go to desktop because I don't see that. Then,
We can see it now.
okay. And then go up here to that one. So this is the assessment form. So the assessment form goes through and it defines the different zones that are around your home. And then it talks about that there are what your next steps are to become recognized as a FireWise USA site. One of those is, as I mentioned, the first one you'll notice it says you have to create a committee. Then you must have the risk assessment done. It's very important that the risk assessment must be signed off by your local fire department. So you just can't apply without getting approval from your local jurisdiction to agree with that assessment and identify what those actions are. And then it says each year your neighbors must complete an educational and risk reduction actions identification in the plan. And I'll show you a copy of what that looks like here shortly. And then when you're done, you apply for recognition through the portal. And the application will go by identifying who the participants are, give some information about the general site description. It'll discuss the general site information about it, the properties that are within the boundary. It gives an overview. You give a description of the local wildland fire characteristics for the area that you're in. And then you'll list your the observations. Now, these observations are not, we want to make sure that everyone understands, it's not a single assessment of every single home in the FireWise community. It's an overall broad statement of the assessment of the neighborhood we're evaluating. So a lot of times that's why it's okay that after you become a FireWise community, another house can join and it doesn't take the fire department to come back out and do a new assessment just on that house. Because when we do the initial, let's say 8, we're not necessarily doing a assessment on each home of those 8. It's a general assessment of the neighborhood. And we make sure that these boxes are checked correctly in how they've been identified for the information in there about the siding, the materials, the skirting materials, the roofing, the windows, gutter types, and then the different zones, the 0 to 5, the 5 to 30, and the 30 to 100. Again, it's the broad statement of the neighborhood. What is the shape of the neighborhood look like? It's not an individual assessment of each home. And then we'll identify any common areas or public lands and provide comment on that. And then in summary, it's just the general observation of what was found and what some of the recommendations and goals are over the next 5 years that this community plans to achieve. Your next step is then we identify, it must be updated. I'm sorry, it's updated at least every 3 years through the site. And that's where the continuing information is listed on there. Let me go to the, so when it says that you need to do, it provides, I believe it was an hour of work or a like-kind match of $30. This is what the volunteer sheet that must be filled out every year. So this volunteer sheet identifies the hours worked and you would put that down, or the $30 that must be spent, and you would identify the money spent and what did it go towards. And that's for each home, and it's just the bare minimum. Now we recommend that it's more than an hour, and hopefully it's more than $30 that everyone would spend to continue to improve the vegetation management in their community per home. But this is the form that must be filled out by each participant in the FireWise to show that we're making continuous improvement efforts in that neighborhood. And then this fact sheet is some examples of what that can be like. So this sheet is one that we also like to share with neighborhoods so they understand what they're getting into and kind of what the expectations are, that you could identify that in the strategic plan of, is the goal only to do 1 hour, or is the goal to do 2 or 3 hours a year? And we think that you have a better idea of that when you look through all the examples of what FireWise says. These are definitely good examples to consider when looking at how to improve the areas around your house. And I can share these sheets with Sohila, and she can pass it on, because these are items that we like to promote and push out to educate people about FireWise to make sure that it's right for them.
Thank you. Quick question. So we ask for assessment from the fire department. And as you know, our area is a combination of city and county. How do we go about it? It's because where I live, 2 street up and down our county, and I'm in the city.
So I think that we need to evaluate that then to say, does it make sense that you're trying to create a FireWise community that's crossing boundaries, or would you be able to get 8 homes that are within city limits to say you're going to be one FireWise community? And then we would draw the line in where Confire would start and say, okay, you're going to be another FireWise community, and let's expand in each direction. From city limits, we start with 8 and we continue to build. In Confire's area, we start with 8 and we continue to build. And we continue to expand both of those areas. And if they're right up next to each other, that's great. And that way each jurisdiction is able to fill out their own assessment form and sign off on it. And but yet we have 2 neighborhoods or 2 communities that become FireWise, and it gives recognition to both organizations.
And so, Haley, I believe you and the Fire Safe Council, the West Contra Costa Fire Safe Council, can oversee both those FireWise communities, because your Fire Safe Council doesn't have jurisdictional boundaries, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, very good. So we have one of our members actually attending a training session in a couple of weeks to evaluate homes, but I assume we can ask fire inspectors to help us with the
Absolutely.
neighborhoods. Okay.
Once
very
you
good.
identify the 8
They'll
that you,
participate and do that assessment. Now we want the assessment to be, already filled out, and we're coming in and reviewing and confirming the information that's on there, because we want the community to develop those strategic goals and plans and areas that they plan to improve. And then we would add to that additional comments.
I'm sorry, so we start the assessment ourselves?
Yes, you start the assessment yourself. And then when it's ready for you to, because the committee needs created. Now, when we say committee, a committee is for each individual neighborhood. So the example of in city limits, outside city limits, that would be 2 different FireWise communities. They would each have their own committee that's going to oversee that strategic plan, the assessment, and we'll say annually, collecting those forms for the minimum of 1 hour work or $30 that has been spent.
Okay,
I mean, each home participating.
thank you. Fire Marshal Govan, would you like to continue? More information?
Well, if anything, I
Please.
wanted to kind of, in the assessment part, I think a lot of that is where you guys need to maybe educate yourself. And I don't have a problem once the 8 or more in the city of Richmond have I been identified, and then we can sit down and kind of, I don't mind spending a little bit of time with you, educating you on the assessment side of things so that you guys have a basis to where to go. And then you guys can kind of train the trainer, so to speak, educate your neighbors so that they're aware of some of this stuff, because a lot of that stuff is going to get into the weeds in the home hardening aspect of it. That 0 to 5 feet around your home is going to be integral in doing that. And currently it'll be 0 to 5 as of January 1, 2023, but as it seems to be going that way, but currently it's 0 to 30 feet. But you got to understand that 0 to 5 is very important. And that's something that, I think both me and Chris can share with you guys, that's where the rubber meets the road. When you're potentially getting rained on by embers in a wildfire scenario, it's those embers and those home hardening that really changes if your home it's going to raise your home survivability compared to potentially some of your neighbors.
Okay, so the 8 homes that want to start, do they have to be within vicinity of each other, or like in a neighborhood is okay?
Yes, they need to be in and it's okay if you skip a house, because you'll have that. You'll go down the street and you'll have a home that says, I do not want to participate. I'm not cutting any of my vegetation. I want no part of this. Leave me out. And some neighbors feel like, uh-oh, we just lost our ability to, because one house won't participate. That's okay. You can still be a FireWise community without the participation of that home. Now, what we wouldn't want is that, let's say within the city of Richmond, that in your area that we have, 4 of your neighbors, and then you go 5 blocks over and there's 4 more neighbors. I mean, they should be in what we would call a neighborhood. And that the idea is that it's okay to have some small gaps, because then the goal is to fill in that neighborhood and it becomes one big community support. That's all FireWise, part of the FireWise community, because you're spreading the word and you're gaining the buy-in and you're becoming a larger group to help us educate and pass on the importance of this, and annually put in the work or the money to improve, not just maintain, but improve the vegetation management around your home.
Thank you. So there are 2 basic elements, home hardening and vegetation management, right?
Correct.
And we need to do the assessment, put in some efforts or money. And what help do we receive besides inspection and check marks, if any?
That's kind of where FireWise the onus is on the community and the homeowners itself. And you guys come together collaboratively and are kind of watching each other's and ensuring that you guys are collectively doing all this as a community. For me, the assistance would be the educational aspects of it, and then potentially coordinating any city resources similar to the Measure X funds, and do something like, say, the West Contra Costa Fire Safe Council has a $5,000 grant that we are giving the FireWise community, and we're going to do some chipping, some wood chipping, a chipper day or something along that. And then I can hopefully coordinate that with city resources so we can expand that and make it a little bit more robust to what you're already started, so to speak. I think that's where we can enhance what you guys are already doing.
So yeah, an example is chipping days. So we've done multiple chipping days in our jurisdiction. And when we've done those, we have put the highest priority on going into communities that are FireWise and offering those chipping days, because those communities and those neighborhoods have done, the ones we've went into have done way more than an hour's worth of work and really limbed up and cleaned up their property, but then said, hey, can you assist us in hauling off the chips and chipping? Where we've done it in Lafayette, the city of Lafayette paid for the dumpster. We came out, CAL FIRE provided the chipper. We provided crew 12 to do the chipping. And it was a whole Saturday day of chipping and, buy-in that, all the neighborhoods in these FireWise communities had all their limbs out along the edge of the street. And we're bringing them to us. We were loading in the stake side, taking it to a single location and chipping it. And it was a great effort, that really involved everyone. It involved the city, it involved the fire department, it involved CAL FIRE, and it involved the community. And it was a win-win for everyone. And that's why when we have limited days that we are available for chipping, we'll say during the fire season, that's why we put our priority in doing it with FireWise communities. It's not to say that's the only group that we will allow chipping to. We'll chip in other areas, but that's where we focused our effort and our highest priority, because that's where we've seen the biggest value, where you'll have 20, 30 groups of homes that are all doing this. And it's not just a row of 8 or 10 homes that are asking for chipping.
Thank you very much. I have two questions before I open to other questions. So one is the role of our Fire Safe Council. What is it exactly that we can do or expected to do to help?
So I think the Fire Safe Council, two things. One, it can help with the recruitment and the education piece, along with helping educate homeowners on the assessment. I'm working with finalizing the assessment and signing off on Hunsaker Canyon over on the edge of Walnut Creek and Lafayette. And Diablo Fire Safe Council has been working with them. I think they helped to get them a $5,000 grant to do some of the chipping and the cleanup. And then they also helped them with the assessment, to where our inspector came out and the assessment was pretty much complete, because they have members that have been through and are members of a FireWise community, and kind of carrying that forward even to other neighborhoods to say, hey, we're a part of the Fire Safe Council and we're here to educate you on the advantages of becoming FireWise, and just talking from homeowner to homeowner. Here's some things we've done to help us become a safer neighborhood. And here's some of the things that we found in retrofitting homes are really the least expensive and the most bang for your buck if you're going to spend some money on home hardening. So I think it's the education piece and the assessment, and then helping them find any available grant dollars, or helping them apply for Measure X dollars when that becomes available. We should have more information in August on that. We're working out some of the final details with the county auditor's office and how we're going to be able to distribute and who we're going to be paying that back to. Because there's the issue of, are we paying the homeowner? Are we paying the contractor? If we're paying the homeowner, then there's 1099s that got to be associated with those payments. So we're working out some of the details, and we should know and have that all finalized sometime in August.
Thank you. Let me explain. This is regarding the $2,000 for home hardening that I informed the community about. So we're going to have more details, but by the beginning of August, whether we get it and give it to contractor or the contractor receives it directly. And could you also count the items that are covered in terms of home hardening, the major items? Because some people are going to start doing it or start getting estimates.
Let me forward you a home hardening retrofit guide. So we want to make sure it's on the home hardening list. A lot of this information is out on CAL FIRE's websites. And I will pull some of those documents that are beneficial for you to pass on to your members. But I would advise not to have any homeowners do any home hardening yet with the anticipation of I'm going to get for sure get reimbursed for a portion of this. Because I do want to clarify that, and let me share screen again, that the priority for home hardening, because it's only required, now it's beneficial everywhere, but where it is required is in the very high fire hazard severity zone. So I recommend that you go to the CAL FIRE and look at it's called FRAP map, FRAP, and you're looking at the fire hazard severity zone viewer. You can download the PDFs, but I think it's more beneficial to actually look at the viewer on this, because you can, as you see, go over here, you can zoom in then to see roads and say, is my house in the red, or am I not in any color at all? Because if you're not in any color at all, or if you're in the medium or you're in the high, it's not to say you're not going to get funding, but the highest priority is going to be for those that are in the red, in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That's going to be for home hardening, that's going to be where the highest priority is going to be given for that, for those matching funds. And then as we move on through the year, if there's funds left, then we'll move down to those other zones. So, you know, we want to make sure our people in the red zone, or are they in, you know, not a zone at all, because, you know, some of these, as you look in here in like El Sobrante along San Pablo Dam Road, there's not even a listing that they're not even in a high. It's not rated. Now the maps are going to get updated. So the problem is with these maps is in the local responsibility area, meaning if you're inside a city limit, it's only identifying, or I should say LRA, it's only identifying the very high. So the new high maps are supposed to come out this fall, which would then show probably San Pablo Dam Road as being high, because the likelihood of it just going from very high to nothing probably isn't the case. It probably is high right there, but that detail is not provided to us just yet. Those maps are supposed to be updated this fall, so we'll be able to identify not only the very high, but where is the high. The goal is that with the home hardening and with the FireWise, it's also going to help we're hoping that it can help people's insurance carriers in having more comfort to insure them, and maybe even lowering their premiums. Some insurance carriers do give a discount for becoming FireWise, not all do, but some do recognize that and provide a discount. So that's another added bonus that you need to check with your insurance carrier to see if you would receive a discount if your community becomes FireWise, your neighborhood. But if you're in one of these red areas, chances are you probably are paying a higher premium for your insurance.
Very good. We even had some of the neighbors who had their policies canceled, and yeah, they had a hard time getting insurance policies because of being in this region. So since the standards for becoming fire safe assessment is the same, I will arrange an educational session with Fire Marshal Govan for neighbors, hopefully in person, so we can learn what goes on. I'll ask who's interested from the community and arrange it. And then we'll have two groups apply to both city and county, and we move on, and gradually we'll learn our role as Fire Safe Council as well.
And then just everyone who's on here, I put a link to the State Fire Marshal's home hardening. And then I also gave you the link to the home retrofit guide, which has the home hardening information inside of that. So that's the links are in the chat.
Very good. Thank you. So I wonder if there are any questions from the group before I share my other questions. Yes, Ariel, go ahead, please.
Hi. Yeah, I wonder, I mean, I understand why we would want to be starting separately, but I'm wondering if there is a way to sort of plan long-term, if this takes off, that the two councils could be, and city and county could be coordinating with each other or working in some sort of a collaborative fashion, given you know, that the jurisdictional boundaries are so unrelated to the fire escape.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be a problem as long as
Great.
it remains separate so that, you know, Chris can take care of his part of his jurisdiction and me. But I think FireWise overall will see the totality of the both communities on each jurisdiction. They're not gonna, I don't think they're too concerned about jurisdictional as opposed to just how big that your collective FireWise community is.
Yeah, it really comes down to just who's signing the assessment form. And that, I mean, it's great that we could cross boundaries, and where they're touching, it's two different FireWise communities, and they could both have the same strategic plan, the same objectives, the same goals. The assessments would just be signed off on by our jurisdiction if you're in the county, and they'd be signed off by Richmond Fire Department if they're in the city. And that we would just expand those, because every fire department is, you know, also likes to track how many FireWise communities do we have within our jurisdiction, and want to expand that. And it's a combination of, well, it's not just how many do you have, but how many members do you have that are FireWise? How many residents? Because as I mentioned, it's one thing if you have, you know, 10 FireWise communities and each of them are only 8, or do you have 2 FireWise communities with 100 people in each one? So it's a combination of not only how many you have, but how many members do you have that are FireWise that are residents in your jurisdiction?
So becoming FireWise is collectively doing vegetation management and home hardening. And
Correct.
vegetation management, the most important thing is first 5 feet from your home. Could you just, I know you're going to send me the guide and everything, but please understand that people have very limited budget. They need to prioritize. Well, what are the most important elements of home hardening?
The most important elements is just, you know, reviewing your 5 feet and just kind of taking away some of those items around your home that would burn very quickly in the event of embers hitting you. So there's a lot to it. I don't want to kind of downplay it and just say, oh, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but you'll see it gets off into, you know, your roof, your vents, your eaves and soffit, your windows, your walls, your decks, rain gutters, patio covers, chimneys, garage, fences, driveways, you know, even your address. Is it visible from the street? Is it visible at night? You know what I mean? So we could go down that rabbit hole as we get closer to, once we've kind of identified the area, we can kind of get into the weeds of things, because there's a lot to it. And I don't want to kind of just throw a lot at you now where it's like, what did he say? Because again,
And
all those.
I also don't want to interpret that you have to do the home hardening. It can be just the vegetation management. And a lot of communities that are FireWise focus on the vegetation management in the first year or two. And then they start focusing on the home hardening on year 3, year 4, because it depends. Because the home hardening is the more expensive piece as you're retrofitting items on the house. And I think when you say, well, what one makes the most sense? It depends. You know, do you set up on top of a hillside that you're subject to ember cast a mile away in a known area that has a very high fuel load that's going to produce a lot of embers with a typical Diablo or northern wind event? And are you right in that path? Well, if that's the case, then the ember resistant vents may be the best bang for your buck with for a home hardening. It just depends. In some cases, that is the most the best place to spend the money and the most effective. But it just depends on where your house sits. What are you subject to, and do you sit in an area that it's highly probable that you could be dealing with ember cast from a mile away in a very high risk area with from a typical northern wind event. Another piece is like, or does your property back up to open space and it's an entire wood fence line that backs up to that? In the retrofitting guide, it'll identify you don't need to necessarily replace all of the wood fence, but what they do recommend is that you take that section of 5 feet from your house and remove that wood fence and replace it with metal gates or a metal fence. So it's not going to, the best example I've given, like a wick to the house, that the fence is burning, but then as it gets closer to the house, the fence continues to burn and it catches the house on fire. If you've done your defensible space and you've done your vegetation management and you have that wood fence, do you have that 5-foot break along the edge of your house with a metal gate that it's going to stop burning and not burn right up next to your home? And all that information is in that retrofit or that home hardening guide about recommendations. Some people think, oh, I got to tear out my entire wood fence. Not necessarily. What we're concerned about is that the fence does not catch your house on fire.
Thank you very much.
We have a problem in our neighborhood with several houses with dead and dying pine trees, large trees. And I was wondering if any pressure could be put on by the fire department. We are actually in the county. We're between Castro Ranch Road and Kennedy Grove. And the East Bay Regional Park District, I guess it was last year, sent something out about dead standing trees burn hotter, faster, and have the ability to cast embers far ahead of the original fire, igniting potentially dangerous new fires. So we are concerned about these very large dead pine trees that are in people's yards or behind people's yards. Some actually are up the hill, technically in Kennedy Grove property line. But can the fire department do anything about putting a little pressure on?
So we can provide recommendations and identify that it's a hazardous condition, but there is not any state regulations or requirements out there or any local ordinance that identifies that the fire department can come in and require or cut down a dead tree. Once it falls down, then we have the ability to identify that dead fuel on the ground must be removed. But if it is still standing, there is not any state regulation or local regulation that says the fire department has the ability to come in and you must cut down a dead tree and remove it. That does not exist with any fire department in Contra Costa County.
So our hands are kind of tied as far as putting a little pressure on.
Well, we say we can educate the homeowner.
Okay, that'd be
and
good.
encourage them to remove it. And as we move into some of the mitigation efforts that for potential funding that could be available with Measure X dollars to do wildfire mitigation or vegetation management, that could be considered. But the idea isn't that we want to make it clear that we've passed this on, many times, that Crew 12 and Measure X isn't intended for all these one-off property owners that are non-compliant and unwilling to improve their property. And the fire department's going to save the day and come in and cut down trees and remove all these hazards. It needs to be a joint effort between the property owner, the city, the fire department, and our agency when Crew 12 gets involved.
But you can make a point of educating the people with the problems of
Yes.
dead trees. Okay, that's good.
Thank you. Before I give the mic to Jim, I would like to add, sorry, many residents complain about their neighbors' junipers or other flammable vegetation. Is there a code for flammable vegetation that should be managed or controlled?
It depends on the zone that they're in. Where is that? Are they in the 0 to 5? Are they in the 5? Well, right now it's 0 to 30. Or are they going to be in the 0 to 5? Are they in the 5 to 30 or the 30 to 100 feet from the structure? Where is that located at?
It's mostly
So-
0 to 30 in front yards. That is the or side yards that is concerning to residents who know about it or in my mailing list, their neighbors don't know about it. I don't know. They don't have the face to talk to the neighbor directly and think the city or county should do something.
And as far as it being required, it goes back to, it depends. Are they in the red, very high fire hazard severity zone? Because if they're in the very high, then that's what we're talking about, defensible space inspections that are, we do have the ability to come in and identify the violation and identify what would need to be done. Now, how the current language states, it's listed as if they're non-compliant, then it's a fine. And then all we can do is fine them and then move on. So it still could require, you know, some residents would look at it and say, well, it's cheaper for me to pay the fine and not remove the hazard. The hope is that educating the residents of the hazard that exists either in their front yard or their backyard and encouraging them to remove the hazard or trim up the hazard. Is the hazard just overgrown and got to a point that it's if it was trimmed back and limbed up, would it still be a hazard? Is it separated properly from other species that is a standalone bush or plant? Would it be okay?
Thank you. Jim, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Sahila. Just following up on your question and what Officer Bachman brought up, it'd be interesting to know what the actual regulation is. That's number one, and maybe this is fairly well known, I don't know. Number two is, we've all learned to or inherited houses where you had foundation plantings. And those are all in the first 5 feet. Sometimes it's the camellia that your grandmother gave you. And so you have an emotional attachment to things. But just as a general rule, because you can't always get it perfect, I know the issue is embers hitting the shrubs, particularly perhaps a dense conifer, and going up into the eaves. But is there any kind of compromise, at least to start, you know, taking it down 6 feet from the eaves or something as a general rule that could help? And just real quickly, lastly, is Measure X both county and city or just county?
It's countywide.
Okay.
I mean, it's countywide. Every fire jurisdiction will have the ability to apply for, to submit projects, to request vegetation management, or in the area that we have some funding available to provide like matching funds. It's available to residents across the entire Contra Costa County, not just Contra Costa County Fire, not just Richmond, but every fire district and every resident across Contra Costa County Fire. It's just some of the funding will be placed, a higher priority will be placed depending on the program. Some of them will place a higher priority on the very high fire hazard severity zone as a priority 1, and then the high as priority 2.
And the other question was about compromise of that 5 foot around the house, like if we put, I don't know, pebbles.
The compromise could happen now when we have the 0 to 30, but once we get into the ember resistant 0 to 5, which is goes into effect on January 1st, 2023. Now, just to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, that's for new construction, and then existing homes, I believe it goes into effect on January 1, 2024.
I believe, yes, I believe you're correct.
So with that, we'd say, yeah, there's a little bit of leeway for the next year and a half. But come January 1st, 2024, unless the regulations change, that ember resistant zone of 0 to 5 feet would be required on all existing homes if you're in the very high fire hazard severity zone.
Thank you. Melinda, please. You need to unmute first, please.
Okay. I believe we live in a very high fire zone. We live on San Pablo Creek, and the houses around us, there are pretty huge properties that have very dense vegetation, very tall trees with a lot of vegetation underneath. I mean, hundreds of trees, but they're rental properties. Is there, I don't think the renters would have the means or the
Authority.
ability or even the authority to do anything. Is there any ruling about people that own rental properties in high zones?
Yeah, so our notifications go out to the property owners. If the property owners have a address that's out of the jurisdiction, we send it to them. We don't send it to the site. And I've kind of toyed back and forth of sending it to both, but then, our mailing fees and all that kind of goes up. Our budget kind of gets exaggerated real quick in that. But yeah, that's kind of the gray area in all of this, because we send it to the property owners, but they might not be communicating to their renters that, hey, this is the time of the year where you need to go do X, Y, and Z, or even themselves hire a contractor to come do it, or, you know what I mean? So it's interesting that you asked that question, because I've thought of that myself, but we are required to send that information to the property owner, which we do.
And how will you, do you go get properties? I mean, how do you know who to send them to? Or
It's who we have on record as the property owners through the county.
It's through we get their addresses and information through the tax assessor's office.
Right.
So wherever their tax bill is getting mailed, that's how we, if we get a complaint on a property with weed abatement and we're dealing with non-compliance, then those notifications go out to the property owner based on who's receiving and paying the property taxes on that parcel.
So should I make a complaint about these properties? I mean, I'm thinking they're like a half an acre of, we're down by the creek, so it's really dense vegetation, and there's, a bunch of dead wood, live wood, some beautiful trees, but should I complain to you guys, or?
Well, I guess it depends. Are you complaining about the vegetation, the grass, dead trees? I mean, what's
I'm only worried about fire safety.
No, is it near occupied homes? Is it in the open space?
Near occupied homes. I mean, there's people that live there, and the trees are there. Some of their trees hang over into our property, near where we park our cars. Yeah, I mean, there's houses all around here too. If any of it caught on fire, it would be, we live near Castro Ranch Road. Our address is the Dam Road, but we're like 100 yards off the road. And our driveway goes through those properties. And while we spent $18,000 cutting down trees and trimming things up around here, because we're paranoid about fire, but we don't have the authority to, or the money to go do everybody's property. And the other,
I guess I need to confirm, like, if we're complaining, as I mentioned earlier, if we're complaining about live or dead trees that are standing, we don't have the authority to come in and tell someone they must cut a tree down, or deal with that, the status of
There
that
are-
standing tree?
There are down trees, there's
Okay.
big branches. I mean, you know, it's an active woods, which, you know, that's what happens in the woods. And the other side of our property, we live on the creek, which the San Pablo Creek through El Sobrante is the people that built the neighbor community, the Robin Hood community. They own that property and they stopped paying taxes, I think, either in the 50s or the 60s. So it's not owned by anybody. It's not our property. It's not the neighbor's property.
It's not counties.
And nobody claims it, but we've drug a ton of dead wood out of there, but there's still our property kind of is wrapped around by the creek. There's still just a ton.
And
And
down
it's-
trees, down oaks.
The parcel you're talking about, is it 5 acres or more, or is it less than 5 acres?
It's divided up into parcels, but it goes all the way around the Robin Hood neighborhood. It's way more than 5 acres in totality, but it's cut up, and the developers, you know, it was their property. They just chose to,
They're probably
you know,
all.
they're probably all dead by now. And I'm sure that company is gone. Those houses were built in the 50s. And I've tried to talk to the county about it because a huge oak tree fell in our yard and across the creek. And at first we thought it was the neighbor's responsibility. It actually hit our shed, but it turned out, no, it's in no man's land. And we don't really know where to go with that.
I would say let's start with, look on your tax bill, confirm who you're paying your fire tax to. Are you paying taxes to Confire or a different agency?
Yeah, okay.
And then if it's Confire, then you can go to our website and there's a complaint form that you can select and fill out. And somebody will be in contact with you and we'll send an inspector out to evaluate. The reason I was asking about, because we'll have to look at the size of the parcel. There's different rules and regulations when you get over 5 acres. Then just it's required to put some breaks in and along the perimeter of the property line versus the entire parcel. So if someone owns 50 acres of woods, the requirement isn't that they have to go through all 50 acres and clean it up. It's really more, it's about the along the property lines and creating that defensible space from the property line to the neighbor's property, so we're not creating a hazard.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you. Chief Bachman, we're coming towards the end of the meeting. Can I ask you to please provide an update about the fire danger today signs to the community? I would appreciate it.
Sure. So we have 2 signs that we've agreed to put up in the community. So he has given me a couple different addresses. I still need to get out and look at those locations. I'm going to be out again next week evaluating those and should be able to provide then an update. These last 3 weeks have been very time consuming for a lot of us in our organization. I haven't been able to dedicate the time towards a lot of the stuff with FireWise and mitigation because we've been focusing on, we just consolidated with East Contra Costa County. And I had to get everything lined up for our Fire Prevention Bureau that our inspections and everything still continued this week without a glitch. That if you're coming in to apply for a permit, and they used to be in East counties, that it's a seamless application, and that process continues along with all the new construction development, that those properties were ready for inspection, and our computer systems transferred over that we were ready to continue to do inspections. So that part's behind us. Now we're back to focusing on, or I am anyway, focusing back on our county as a whole and back into doing mitigation efforts. In fact, we're starting a project in Martinez on Monday morning in a historic olive grove and doing a shaded fuel break in collaboration with the city of Martinez and an arborist and a biologist to make sure that we're meeting CEQA compliance, along with we're not damaging these 100-year-old trees that we're creating a shaded fuel break through and providing defensible space along the back of the residence where it backs up to. So I'll be able to focus more effort back onto these mitigation requirements and preparedness items. So my hope is that I can relay information to you next week, Sohila, on the sign locations, and we'll get Crew 12 out there to install them. But I do have 2 earmarked for West County. We already have the signs. They're ready to install. It's just approving the locations that you've identified, and I need to confirm that they are both in Confire's jurisdiction where the signs would be going.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I would like to ask everybody who's interested in starting a FireWise community, please write down your email addresses so we can start that seed group and then expand. Hopefully, I will contact you. Please put your email addresses if you're interested. And I'll be communicated with Fire Marshal Govan about an educational session for the community and starting with assessment and process, and hopefully we'll become FireWise in 3 years. Is it going to take 3 years? Our community has started actually a while ago on vegetation management.
No, so the 3 years means like once you become a FireWise community, that you have to reapply every 3 years to maintain that status. And that's when the FireWise, where you mail your application off to, the FireWise organization will evaluate those annual records, the maintenance of the 1 hour or the dollars spent, to make sure that, let's say you have 50 homes in your FireWise community. Do you have 50 sheets of paper that are filled out each year and identifying what work did they do? Was it documented? And then are you meeting, what's your follow-up statement? Are you meeting those strategic goals that the community has set to improve and make your community safer? I should say neighborhood, your FireWise neighborhood or FireWise community safer.
So we could become FireWise effectively in a month or 2 if we do our homework in terms of education.
Yes, if it moved rather quickly, it's pretty reasonable that it can be done in about 60 days. And I think there's probably a 30 to 60 day turnaround from FireWise. So I would say, you're probably, if you started today with the process, within 4 months, you would probably have the certification back identifying that you're a FireWise community.
Excellent. And we'll organize chipper days and everything. Thank you very much. Fire Marshal Govan, would you like to add anything at the end?
No, I don't have anything to add other than, get out there and do your defensible space, your own inspections and start that process. And if you have neighbors who are bad neighbors, feel free to give us a call, drop us an email. Email Zohalia. She does a great job of emailing your guys' concerns to me. So continue to do that, and we can work collaboratively to hopefully make your neighborhoods and everyone's neighborhoods safer.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both fire marshals. I'm very excited to have a fire safe council and be working with both city fire marshal and county fire marshal. We are grateful, and we'll do our homework. We'll do our share to make this community FireWise. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.